Hello, everyone. 1 second. Come on, computer. There we go. Hello, I forgot to plug in the webcam before we started. I really need to get another USB extender. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to reading of the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, also known as Modaozushi. We were at Chapter 3 last time, reading through Wei Wuxian's adventures on the Buddha mountain. He's on the mountain. He ran into an old friend and his brother and had a rough time there, and is trying to solve a mystery. There is this small town at the base of this mountain where people keep having their souls stolen, and nobody can figure out why or what's doing it, and so Wei Wuxian is figuring it out and putting the pieces together to find out what is actually behind all these terrible tragedies. So let's see where we stopped at. We were almost through Chapter 3 last time. Where did we stop? Okay. I'm going to start right on this page. Hello, everyone. Paul, Natasha, welcome. We begin with Chapter 3, page 89, The Prideful. There were a number of cultivators pacing near the old graveyard, intending to wait for a windfall. Someone had brazenly raised a spirit attraction flag, only to summon a bunch of wailing souls. Wei Wuxian pulled the reins, scanned the area, and asked loudly, "Excuse me, but might I ask where the little Gongzi of the Jin family and the Lan family have gone?" As expected, there were actually responses now that he'd washed his face. A cultivator answered, "They left this place and went to the Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden." "The Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden?" Wei Wuxian asked. The family of independent cultivators from the countryside had also snuck back up the mountain after hearing the immortal binding nets had been destroyed and joined the night patrol. The middle-aged man saw that his clothes, along with that teeth-bearing donkey, looked like those of the lunatic who had rescued them earlier. Feeling somewhat awkward at the realization, he pretended nothing was the matter, but the round-faced girl pointed the way. "That way! It's a stone cave shrine on top of the mountain." Wei Wuxian questioned, "Which deity is worshipped in that shrine?" I think it's a naturally formed stone statue of a heavenly maiden." Wei Wuxian nodded. "Thank you." Then he urgently dashed in the direction of the shrine of the heavenly maiden. The deadbeat's marriage, the coffins struck by lightning, the fiancé killed by jackals, the father and daughter who lost their souls consecutively, the extravagant funeral clothes. Bead by bead, everything was being threaded together to form a complete string. No wonder the compass of ill winds couldn't point in the right direction, and the spirit attraction flag was even more useless. They had all underestimated the creature on Mount Dafan, because it wasn't what they thought it was at all. Meanwhile, Lan Wangji and his company had already moved on to the Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden in search of clues after coming up empty-handed when investigating the old graveyard. In Mount Dafan, besides the ancestral graves belonging to the townspeople of Fojiao Town, there was also a Shrine of the Heavenly Maiden. It was neither Buddha nor Bodhisattvas that were worshipped in the shrine, but a dancing Heavenly Maiden. Centuries ago, a hunter from Fojiao Town traveled deep into the mountains and discovered a strange rock within a cave. It was nearly 3 meters tall, naturally formed, and looked extraordinarily like a human with all of its limbs posed, as if dancing. What was more incredible was that the 5 features of the stone statue's face were vaguely recognizable, resembling the smiling face of a woman. The people of Fojiao Town were greatly amazed. They believed this was a divine rock formed by the gathering of spiritual qi between heaven and earth, and they fabricated many of its related myths themselves. There was one about an immortal lord who was secretly in love with Jiu-Tan. I don't know if T-I is a H sound. Jiu-Tan. I'm going to have to look that up. Jiutian Xuanyu, and carved a statue in her image to alleviate the misery of longing. When the Xuanyu discovered it, she was enraged, and the incomplete statue was never heard of again. There was also another where the Jade Emperor had a beloved daughter who passed early, and his longing for her manifested as the statue. There were all sorts of stories, and they were all mind-boggling. Eventually, the townspeople began to truly believe these constructed myths they told each other, and so the stone cave was renovated into a divine shrine, the stone platform carved into a divine altar, and the stone statue was worshipped as the dancing heavenly maiden with year-round offerings. Hello, Marcos. Thanks for joining us. I am doing well, thank you. The interior of the cave was as spacious as a double-entrance temple, and the statue of the heavenly maiden stood in its center. At first glance, it certainly did very much resemble a human. Even the waistline could be said to be wonderfully graceful. However, one began to notice how rudimentary it was upon closer examination. Nonetheless, that a naturally formed object could resemble a human to this degree was already quite the marvel. Lan Wangji raised the compass of ill winds high up, then down low, yet the needle was unmoved. Upon the altar was a mess of candle wax residue and a thick layer of incense ash, and the smell of rotten sweetness wafted from the offering plates. The people of the Lan clan of Gusu were all at least a little germophobic, so he fanned the air in front of his nose. I hear the locals say prayers made at the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden are very effective, so why is it so run down? Why isn't anybody clearing this place? Lan Shizui replied, 7 people consecutively lost their souls, and rumors say it's some fierce fiend that came out of the ancestral graves after lightning struck. So everyone is scared of coming up the mountain. Since the worshippers stopped coming, there's naturally no one to clean up either. A disdainful voice sounded from outside the cave. Nothing but a crappy hunk of rock. Who knows who bestowed it with its divinity and had the audacity to place it here for worship? Jinling entered with his hands folded behind his back. The silence spell hadn't lasted long, and his mouth could open once more. However, he had nothing good to say the moment his mouth opened. He humphed, peering at the statue of the Heavenly Maiden. These rural villagers. Instead of making a concerted effort on their own when there's trouble, all they do is pray to the divine. There are thousands of millions of people in the world, and the deities can barely take care of themselves, so why would they care about them? Besides, it's just some nameless rogue deity. If it's so efficacious, then can I wish for the man-eating spirit on Mount Dafan to appear right now in front of me and have that wish be granted? A group of cultivators from small clans followed behind him, and at his words they immediately agreed, laughing uproariously. The once silent shrine grew noisy and crowded all of a sudden with the inpouring of people. Lan Shizui shook his head quietly and turned around, his eyes unconsciously sweeping past the face of the Heavenly Maiden. The visible but indistinct features seemed to be a compassionate, smiling face. But he felt an indescribable sense of familiarity with this smiling face, as if he'd seen it somewhere before. Where in the world had he seen it before? Lan Shizui felt this was something important. He unconsciously approached the altar, wanting to examine the face of the Heavenly Maiden in greater detail. Right then, someone bumped into him. A cultivator who'd been standing behind him suddenly collapsed noiselessly. The others were greatly alarmed, and everyone instantly raised their guard. Jinling demanded cautiously, "What's wrong with him?" Lan Shizui bent down with his sword in hand to check. The cultivator was breathing fine, as if he'd merely fallen asleep all of a sudden, but he wouldn't wake up no matter how he was slapped or called to. Lan Shizui stood up. "This is like..." But before he could finish, the cave that had been dark was suddenly alight. Red light filled in, like a cataract of blood washing down the walls. The candles on the altar and in the corners of the stone cave all began to burn on their own. Clangs resounded in the cave as those who had swords unsheathed them, and those who had talismans pulled them out. Right then, someone outside the shrine suddenly rushed inside and splashed the Heavenly Maiden statue with a gourd of medicinal wine. The stone cave was instantly flooded with the thick, choking smell of alcohol. The newcomer took out a talisman and slashed it through the air, hurling it toward the statue. The altar was immediately set ablaze, illuminating the cave with the brightness of day. Wei Wuxian tossed aside the Qiankun bag he'd picked up, having used everything that was inside it. Reading is a sign of being an alien. That's interesting. I've never heard that one before. He shouted, "Everyone, get out! Watch out for the soul-eating heavenly maiden!" Someone cried out in alarm. The heavenly maiden's changed pose. The divine statue had clearly had both arms raised earlier, one arm pointing to the sky and one foot lifted, her form graceful. Yet in that moment, amidst the vibrant reds and yellows of the blazing fire, it had dropped both arms and legs. This was absolutely the truth, and not a trick of the eye. In the next second, this divine statue raised one of its legs and stepped out of the flames. Wei Wuxian yelled, "Run, run, run! Stop hacking at it, it's useless!" Most of the cultivators paid him no mind. The soul-eating monster they'd been searching all over for had finally appeared, so how could they let it go? However, even though there were so many spiritual swords attacking, so many talismans being thrown, and many other spiritual devices waving about, none of them stopped the statue from moving. It was nearly 3 meters high, and when it moved, it was like a towering giant, exceedingly imposing. It picked up 2 cultivators and raised them to its face. Its stone mouth seemed to open and close, and those 2 cultivators' swords dropped to the ground with a clang, their heads bowed. Obviously, they'd just had their souls sucked out. None of the attacks were effective. Finally willing to listen to Wei Wuxian, the others swarmed out of the cave, fleeing for their lives in all directions. With so many people and so many faces, the higher Wei Wuxian's anxiety climbed, the harder it was for him to find Jinling. He rode the donkey out, searching as he dashed into a bamboo grove. When he looked back, he encountered the Lan Juniors, who were also in flight. Wei Wuxian called after them, "Children!" "Who are you calling children?" Lan Jingyi protested. "Do you know whose house we're from? Do you think you're our elder just because you washed your face?" You have to remember that Wei Wuxian's physical body looks young. He's probably only a teenager, but mentally he's been alive for decades, and of course sees these kids as kids. What is my color? My hair color? My hair color is a dark brown. Okay, Goga. That is a Chinese term for, like, your older brother. So he's kind of being, I guess he's kind of being respectful here, but also I think a little teasing, since it's not like, I think it's kind of a little familiar. I think he's teasing the kid a little bit. Wei Wuxian acquiesced. "Set off a signal. Call over that Lan Wangji from your clan." The juniors nodded and searched their pockets as they ran. A moment later, Lan Shizui emitted aloud, "The signal flares, they were all used up that night at the Mo estate." Wei Wuxian was shocked. I have gotten worse with my dyslexia. God. Wei Wuxian was shocked. "You guys didn't restock?" The signal flare was rarely ever used, maybe once every 800 years. Lan Shizui replied, feeling ashamed, "We forgot." "How could you forget?" Wei Wuxian tried to scare them. "If your Lan Wangji finds out, you'll all be sorry." Lan Jingyi turned ashen-faced. "Oh no, we'll be punished to death by Lan Wangji this time." "Good, rightly deserved. You won't remember without punishment." Mogongzi, how did you know that creature eating souls wasn't a fiend or a beast, but the heavenly maiden statue?" Lan Shizui asked. Wei Wuxian searched for signs of Jinling as he ran. "How did I know? I saw." Lan Jingyi caught up, and the 2 sandwiched him, one running on his left and one on his right. "What did you see? We saw plenty too." "You saw, and then? What's around the old graveyard?" "What else is there? Souls of the dead." "Exactly, souls of the dead. So it couldn't be a soul-eating beast or fiend. That's obvious. If it were one of those things, then would it leave all these dead souls floating around and not eat them up? No." This time, there was more than one asking questions. "Why's that?" "I gotta say, you lands of Gusu." Wei Wuxian couldn't resist anymore. "Can you focus less on memorizing cultivator etiquette, clan origin history, and all that stinking, long-winded nonsense, and teach more practical things instead? What's there not to understand? Souls of the dead are easier to absorb than souls of the living. The flesh of the living is like a protective screen, so in order to devour souls of the living, the screen must be removed. Just like..." He took a glance at the spotted donkey that was panting and rolling its eyes back as it ran. "Just like this. If there's an apple in front of you and another apple locked in a box, which would you eat first? Of course the one in front of you. That creature only devoured souls of the living, and it had a very particular way of doing so, which means it's super picky and quite powerful too." Lan Jingyi was shocked. Is that how it is? That makes a lot of sense, I think. Wait, so you're not actually crazy? Lan Shizui explained as he ran. We all thought the landslide and the lightning striking the coffins was how the lost souls came about, so naturally we thought it would be a soul-eating fiend. Wrong, Wei Wuxian said. What's wrong? The order is wrong and the cause is wrong. Let me ask you this. Between the landslide and the soul-eating business, which came first and which came after? Which is the cause and which is the consequence? Lan Shizui replied without hesitation. The landslide happened first, the soul-eating came after. The former is the cause, the latter the consequence. Completely wrong, Wei Wuxian explained. The soul-eating came first, and the landslide after. The soul-eating was the cause, and the landslide was the consequence. The night of the landslide, there was a sudden thunderstorm, and lightning struck open a coffin. Remember that. The first to lose his soul, the deadbeat, was trapped on the mountain for a night, and then got married a few days later. What's wrong with that? Lan Jingyi asked. Everything, Wei Wuxian replied. An idle, penniless good-for-nothing. Where did he get the money to host such a grand wedding? The boys couldn't answer. It was no wonder. The Lan clan of Gusu had never been a family that needed to consider the question of wealth or poverty. Wei Wuxian continued, Have you seen all the souls of the dead floating around Mount Dafan? There's an old man who was killed by a brutal strike to the head. The craftsmanship and material of his funeral garb were both exceptional. To wear such extravagant funeral garb, there's no way his coffin was empty. There must have been some accompanying funerary items to keep his soul at peace. The coffin that was struck open by lightning was probably his. The people who came to collect the corpse didn't discover any funerary items, so they must have been taken by the deadbeat, which explains his sudden wealth. The deadbeat suddenly became rich and got married the night after the landslide, so something strange must have happened that night. It was storming and he was hiding from the rain in the mountains. Where on Mount Dafan is there shelter from the rain? The shrine of the Heavenly Maiden, and usually when people visit a shrine, they always do one thing. Make a wish? Lan Shizui asked. Correct. For example, he might ask to get lucky, hit it rich, have money to get married or something. The Heavenly Maiden fulfilled his wish and sent forth lightning that struck open the graves, showing him the wealth within the coffins. His wish was granted, and as its price, the Heavenly Maiden descended on his wedding night and sucked out his soul. You're just guessing, right? Lan Jingyi said. Yes, but if we pursue this train of thought, everything can be explained. Wei Wuxian replied. How do you explain Miss Ayan? Lan Shizui asked. Good question, Wei Wuxian said. You must have asked around too before you ascended the mountain. Ayan had only just gotten engaged at the time. Every young girl who's just been betrothed must have the same wish. Lan Jingyi didn't quite get it. What wish? Nothing more than I hope my husband will love and cherish me for the rest of his life, that he'll only love me, or some such, Wei Wuxian said. The youths were confused. Can a wish like that be granted? Wei Wuxian shrugged. It's easy, as long as her husband's life ended Oh, that's so sad. As long as her husband's life ended soon after, then wouldn't he have loved her his entire life? I mean... Understanding dawned on Lan Jingyi, and he exclaimed in excitement, So after Miss Ayan became engaged, her husband was killed by a jackal in the mountains the next day. And it's very possible because Miss Ayan went and made a wish at the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden. Wei Wuxian struck the iron while it was hot. Whether it was the jackal or something else that killed him is hard to say. Ayan has another point of interest. Of all the victims, why is she the only one whose soul returned? How is she different from the others? The difference is that she has a family member who also lost his soul. In other words, there was a family member who replaced her. Blacksmith Zheng, Ayan's father, loved his daughter. So when he saw his daughter had lost her soul and no medication was working, under such dire circumstances, what was the only thing he could do? Lan Shizui answered quickly this time. He could only place his last hope in the heavens, so he also went to the shrine of the Heavenly Maiden to make a wish. The wish was, I hope my daughter Ayan's soul would return. Wei Wuxian commended him. That's why only Ayan's soul returned, and the reason why the third person to lose his soul was Blacksmith Zheng. And although Ayan's soul was spat back out, it couldn't escape being damaged. Once the soul returned to its rightful place, Ayan unconsciously began to imitate the dancing pose of the Heavenly Maiden, including the smile. The commonality between those who'd lost their souls was clear. They'd all most likely made a wish before the Heavenly Maiden statue, and the price for their wishes to come true was their souls. This Heavenly Maiden statue had once been an ordinary rock, but it just so happened to resemble a person, so it received centuries of worship that led to it gaining spiritual power. However, its greed was insatiable. One single deviant whim gave it a mind to expedite the elevation of its spiritual powers by way of consuming souls. Offering the fulfillment of a wish in exchange for the devouring of a soul, it operated on the same terms as those wishmakers who offer up their own souls to be devoured. It was a fair trade by all appearances. Everyone got what they wanted, which was why the needle of the compass of ill winds did not move, and the spiritual attraction flag summoned nothing. The treasured swords and talismans were all ineffective, because the creature on Mount Dafan wasn't some nefarious being. It was a god. This was a rogue god raised by centuries of worship, so to use devices made for attacking malicious spirits against it was the equivalent of attempting to extinguish fire with fire. Lan Jingyi exclaimed loudly, "Wait, just now inside the shrine, someone else got their soul sucked out too, but we didn't hear his wish." Wei Wuxian's heart lurched and he halted in his step. Someone had their soul sucked out inside the shrine. Tell me every detail of what happened without leaving out a single thing. One second. I gotta get... Mom! Sorry, we have a back door that does not work well, and every so often I hear someone go out the back door, and the door doesn't close. I'm like, frickin'... And we have 4 cats in here that would love to run outside. So, we were explaining the Heavenly Goddess statue. Lan Shizui quickly gave a clear account. When Wei Wuxian heard Jinling had said, "If it's so efficacious, then can I wish for the man-eating spirit on Mount Dafan to appear right now in front of me and have that wish be granted?" He exclaimed aloud, "Is that not a wish? He was making a wish!" The others who had agreed with Jinling were tacitly understood to have made the same wish. Since the soul-eating Heavenly Maiden was right before them at the time, the wish had already come true, so what followed had been a collection of payment owed. All of a sudden, the spotted donkey came to a stop and started running in the opposite direction. Caught off guard, Wei Wuxian was once again thrown off its back, but he stubbornly grabbed onto the reins. However, from ahead of them in the shrubbery, there came the crunching and slurping sound of something being eaten. An incomparably gigantic figure was hidden in the bushes, its massive head moving back and forth over the abdomen of a person on the ground. When it heard an approaching noise, its head shot up, meeting their eyes. The soul-eating Heavenly Maiden's facial features had originally been unclear, the shape of the eyes, nose, ears, and mouth rough. But after she'd devoured so many cultivators in one go, her 5 features were now distinct. It was now the face of a smiling woman. Copious blood dripped from her bottom lip as she gnawed vigorously upon the arm dangling from her mouth. Everyone immediately followed the spotted donkey and bolted in the opposite direction. Lan Shizui cried despairingly, "That's not right! The Yiling Patriarch said the high-level ones only eat souls and the low-level ones eat flesh." Wei Wuxian replied helplessly, "What are you blindingly believing him for? Anything he came up with was utter bush..." He's talking about himself! Anything he came up with was utter bullshit. None of the rules are absolute. Just take her for a baby. When she didn't have teeth, she could only eat gruel and soup, but now that she's grown up, she wants to eat meat. Her spiritual powers just shot up. Of course she'll want to try something new. The soul-eating Heavenly Maiden stood up. She was big and tall, and moved all 4 of her limbs as she danced crazily, seemingly jubilant. Suddenly a piercing arrow came flying through the air and caught her right in the forehead, the arrowhead penetrating through to the back of her head. Having heard the strum of the bowstring, Wei Wuxian glanced at where the sound came from. Jinling stood upon a tall hill nearby, already knocking the second arrow onto his bow and drawing the string. He let go, and another arrow pierced through her head, its impact so powerful that it forced the soul-eating heavenly maiden to stumble back. Lan Shizui yelled, "Jingongzi, set off your signal flare!" Jinling ignored him, determined to bring down this monster. Sullenly, he knocked 3 arrows onto the bow this time. The soul-eating heavenly maiden wasn't upset in the least, despite having been shot in the head twice. A smile still graced her face as she charged toward Jinling. Although she danced as she went, her speed was still terrifyingly fast, and half the distance was covered in an instant. Several cultivators popped out from the sides to fight her, impeding her from moving farther. Every single arrow Jinling shot hit the mark, and he fired non-stop. It seemed as though he'd made up his mind to empty his quiver before going near the soul-eating heavenly maiden for close-range combat. His hands were steady and his aim was precise, but unfortunately, no spiritual devices would work on her. Jiangcheng and Lan Wangji were both waiting for news in Fojiao Town. Who knew if they would notice anything amiss and rush over? You needed water to extinguish fire. If spiritual devices wouldn't work, then how about demonic tricks? Hello, Rousey, I think. Welcome. Wei Wuxian pulled out the sword hanging on Lan Shizui's waist, cut down a thin piece of bamboo, and swiftly made a flute. I don't know how well that would work. Obviously, this is, it's fiction, but I can't imagine. How do you make a flute with a sword? That's talent. He placed it on his lips and sucked in a deep breath. A sharp flute noise pierced through the sky like a whistling arrow, shooting straight for the clouds. He shouldn't have done this unless it was absolutely necessary, but with things as they were, he no longer cared what was summoned, as long as it was murderous enough and vengeful enough. As long as it could rip apart the soul-eating heavenly maiden, it was good enough. Lan Shizui was completely dumbfounded. Lan Jingyi, however, covered his ears and cried out in dismay. "What are you doing, playing a flute at a time like this? It sounds horrible!" Of the group of cultivators engaged in fighting the soul-eating heavenly maiden, several had already had their souls sucked away. Jinling drew his sword. He was less than 6 meters away from the soul-eating heavenly maiden, and his heart was pounding, hot blood surging to his brain. "If I don't take her head in one swing, I will die here. If I die, I die." Just then, clinking and clanking sounds resounded within the forest of Mount Dafan. Clink-clank, clink-clank. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, the noise came haltingly and reverberated in the deathly silent forest. It sounded like iron chains hitting each other, dragging on the ground. It was coming closer and closer, louder and louder. For some reason, the sound was oppressively threatening. Even the soul-eating heavenly maiden stopped her dance, and her arms raised in the air as she stared blankly at the deep darkness from whence the sound came. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I mispronounced it. More surprised more people aren't watching. And the book readings have always been pretty small. Eventually, they will probably move to the second channel, but right now that channel is so small it has a lot of restrictions on it, so it's just easier to do it here. Wei Wuxian put away the flute and stared intently in the same direction. Although the ominous feeling was growing stronger and stronger, since this creature was willing to answer his summons, then at least it was one who would obey him. The noise came to a sudden stop, and a silhouette materialized from the darkness. After seeing the figure and its face clearly, many of the cultivators' faces contorted. Even when facing the soul-eating heavenly maiden, who could suck away their soul at any time, they never shrank back, nor did they show any sign of fear. However, the sound of their screams was now filled with unconcealable terror. Yes, best boy is coming. "The Ghost General! It's the Ghost General! It's Wen Ning!" Like the Yiling Patriarch, the one known by the moniker Ghost General was infamous and widely known by all, and the two usually appeared together. There was only one man whom that name referred to, the #1 fierce corpse under the control of Yiling Patriarch Wei Ying, the one who aided his tyrannical rule, fanned the flames of chaos, helped the villain in his evil, and caused havoc in the world, Wen Ning. Wen Ning's head was slightly bowed, and his hands drooped by his sides like a marionette waiting for orders from his puppeteer. His face was pale and delicate, and as a matter of fact, he had a certain easy and somewhat melancholic handsomeness. However, there were no pupils in his eyes, only a field of deathly white. With this, plus the numerous black cracks crawling up his neck to his cheeks, that melancholia was transformed into a terrifying gloom. The hems of his long robes and sleeves were tattered and frayed, revealing wrists that were the same ghastly white as his face. A pair of iron shackles and chains were locked over them, same with the ankles. The clinking and clanking sound was created while he was dragging himself along, and when he stopped, everything returned to a deathly silence once more. They just don't know how much of a cinnamon roll he is. Yes, that's very true. There's a image for him. Let me see if I have that image on file. We were over here. The art in this book is so pretty. The Russian version, I think, of the translation of this also has really, really pretty art. I should try and find that. Where are you, best boy? Oh, it doesn't look like I have. Is that best boy? I can't tell. Let's make these pictures bigger so I can see them. I thought I had all the images from the book here, but aha, I do have him. There he is. That's the best boy. Big scary zombie. I love him. He's amazing and will be a very important character as the story continues. For now, he's just a dangerous zombie. One sec, I'm gonna check one more thing before we continue. Alright. It wasn't hard to imagine why the cultivators present were all terrified. Wei Wuxian wasn't any calmer than the others, and the tempestuous waves in his heart had already surged past his head. It wasn't that Wen Ning shouldn't have shown up here, but rather that he shouldn't have appeared in this world at all. He should have been killed and reduced to ashes long before the siege of the Burial Mounds. When Jinling and the others heard the others say Wen Ning's name, the sword he was pointing at the soul-eating heavenly maiden unconsciously changed directions. Taking advantage of him being distracted, the soul-eating heavenly maiden reached her long arm out in delight and picked him up. Seeing how she had already opened her mouth wide and was nearing Jinling's face, Wei Wuxian no longer had time for his own shock. He raised the bamboo flute once more. His hands were trembling slightly, and the melody he played quivered with him. On top of that, because of how crudely made the flute was, the sound could almost be said to be raspy and awful. 2 notes were played, and Wen Ning began to move. In the blink of an eye, he shifted and appeared before the soul-eating heavenly maiden. Wen Ning struck out with his palm, and the soul-eating heavenly maiden's neck made a cracking sound. Her body didn't move, but the slap turned her head all the way around. Her face was now facing the same direction as her back, but still that smile remained. Wen Ning struck again, barehanded, and cleanly chopped off the soul-eating heavenly maiden's right hand, which held Jinling in its clutches. She looked down at the wrist that had been cut so cleanly. She didn't twist her own head back to the correct position, but instead turned so her face and her back were facing Wen Ning. Wei Wuxian didn't dare slack off. He took a deep breath and bowed his head, directing Wen Ning to face battle. However, it wasn't long before he began to feel more and more apprehensive. Low-level walking corpses could not think for themselves and required his orders as guidance. Even fierce corpses, stronger in attack, were often confused, with no consciousness of their own. Wen Ning was different. He'd been refined by Wei Wuxian, and it wouldn't have been a lie to say he was the strongest fierce corpse in the world, one of a kind. He could think. He could ponder. Other than his lack of care for injuries or for fire, cold, poison, and anything the living might fear, he was no different from the living. But the Wen Ning in this moment clearly had no consciousness of his own. Just as he was feeling bewildered by this, alarmed cries suddenly sounded from the field. It turned out that Wen Ning had beaten down the soul-eating heavenly maiden, firmly pinning her on the ground before picking up a boulder taller than a man, raising it over the soul-eating heavenly maiden, and heavily bludgeoning her with it. The powerful blow struck the soul-eating heavenly maiden's body like lightning, forcefully crushing her into pieces. Amidst the white debris of rocks strewn about, a glowing snow-white pearl rolled forth. This was the core formed by the dozens of souls the soul-eating heavenly maiden had devoured, and if collected and carefully managed, the people whose souls had been devoured earlier could still be restored. However, no one had the mind to pick up the pearl at the moment. All the swords that had been previously pointed at the soul-eating heavenly maiden now turned Wen Ning's way. Not very grateful. One of the cultivators shouted at the top of his lungs, "Surround him!" Some answered hesitantly, but there were more who were wavering, and some slowly backed away. The cultivator shouted again, "Fellow cultivators, stop him! Don't let him escape! It's Wen Ning we're talking about here!" His words roused the crowd, as if a mere soul-eating monster could be compared to the ghost general. Although it was unknown why he had come, killing 1,000 soul-eating fiends could not compare to capturing one single Wen Ning. After all, with a bite harder and more fearsome than its bark, this was the most obedient mad dog of the Yiling patriarchs. Capturing him would make one's name soar across the cultivation world. The only reason they had rushed to attend the night hunt at Mount Dafan in the first place had been to fight over nefarious creatures and gain experience, so it couldn't be helped that there were those who stirred at this thought. However, the older cultivators who had personally witnessed the madness of Wen Ning in the past still didn't dare move recklessly, and so the man shouted again, "What are you all afraid of? It's not as if the Yiling patriarch is here." That was true when they thought about it. Yeah, what was there to be afraid of? Wen Ning's master had already been shredded to pieces. With those words, the sword circling around Wen Ning abruptly closed in. With a swing of his arms, the heavy black chain swept the circle, knocking the flying swords away. Then he took a step forward, seized the neck of the person closest to him, and lifted him easily off the ground. Wei Wuxian knew the melody he'd played earlier was too urgent, too aggressive, and it had exasperated Wen Ning's ferocity. He had to be neutralized, his emotions calmed, and so Wei Wuxian confidently played another tune. This melody was one that came to his mind naturally, gentle and tranquil, a significant contrast to the strange, sharp sound from before. Wen Ning froze at the sound, then slowly turned toward where the flute was calling to him. Wei Wuxian remained still, meeting those pupilless eyes. A moment later, Wen Ning let go, and the cultivator fell to the ground. He dropped both his arms and walked step by step toward Wei Wuxian. His head was hung low as he dragged his chains across the ground, appearing somewhat dejected. Wei Wuxian backed away as he played the flute, luring him over, and they walked for a while like this, retreating into the forest. Suddenly, he smelled the refreshing scent of sandalwood. He backed into someone, and felt a sharp pain around his wrist, the sound of the flute abruptly stopping with it. Oh no, Wei Wuxian thought. When he turned around and looked, he was met squarely with Lan Wangji's eyes. Their color was so light, the man's gaze appeared frozen. Not good. Lan Wangji had personally witnessed him play the flute to control corpses in the past. Lan Wangji had Wei Wuxian firmly gripped in one hand, and Wen Ning stood woodenly not 6 meters away from them. He looked around sluggishly, as if searching for the sound of the flute that had vanished so suddenly. In the forest nearby, firelight and voices began to grow. Wei Wuxian's mind spun rapidly, and he came to a decision right there. So what if he's seen it before? There are millions out there who know how to play a flute, and the number of people who tried to learn the Yiling's patriarch's way of controlling corpses with flutes could form an entire sect of their own. I'll deny everything, even if it kills me. He resolutely ignored the hand gripping him, raised his arms, and continued playing the flute. This time he played even more urgently, as if urging, as if reprimanding, his breath unsteady, the notes cracking, shrieking, and sharp. He suddenly felt Lan Wangji grip harder. His wrist was going to snap from the force. Unable to withstand the pain, Wei Wuxian's fingers slackened and the bamboo flute fell to the ground. Thankfully, his orders were clear enough, and Wen Ning retreated rapidly, delving soundlessly into the hauntingly dark forest in an instant and vanishing without a trace. Wei Wuxian was afraid Lan Wangji would give chase to kill Wen Ning, so he reversed the hold and seized him back. Yet, unexpectedly, Lan Wangji's eyes were locked firmly on him, and he'd never spared a single look Wen Ning's way. The two stood there thus, clutching each other face to face as they stared at one another. It was then that Jiancheng arrived. He had forced himself to wait patiently for the conclusion of the hunt at Fojiao Town, yet he hadn't even finished a cup of tea before a sect disciple came rushing down the mountain in a panic, telling of the terrible and brutal creature on Mount Dafan. Greatly shaken, he charged back up the mountain, shouting, "Aling!" Jinling had almost had his soul sucked away earlier, but he was safe and well now, and all in one piece. Jojo! That means uncle in Chinese. I think I'm pretty sure it's like a Y-O sound. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Seeing that nothing had happened to Jinling, Jiancheng was greatly relieved. However, that relief soon turned into a furious reprimand. Do you not have a signal flare on you? Don't you know to set one off when you run into those creatures? What are you pretending to be so strong for? Get the hell over here. Jinling was angry at not having captured the soul-eating heavenly maiden as well, and he yelled back. Weren't you the one that said I had to capture it at any cost, that I couldn't go back until I caught it? Jiancheng really wanted to slap this stinking brat back into his mother's womb. But he had indeed said those things, and he couldn't possibly eat his own words. He could only turn to the cultivators who'd collapsed all over the ground and demand of them mockingly. So what was it exactly that pulverized you all into such an honorable state? Among the cultivators, dressed in a myriad of colors, were a number of disciples from the Jiangclang of Yongmeng in disguise, secretly assisting Jinling under Jiancheng's orders in the event he couldn't win the challenge. Truly, as the elder, he'd gone through great pains regarding this outing. One of the cultivators was still in a state of shock. Sect leader, it was Wen Ning. Jiancheng thought he might have heard wrong. What did you say? Wen Ning's back, the man said. In that split second, a mixture of shock, hatred, fury, and disbelief all assailed Jiancheng's face. It took a while before he replied coldly. That creature was already reduced to ashes as a warning to all. How could he be back? It really was Wen Ning, the sect disciple exclaimed. There was definitely no mistake. I definitely wasn't mistaken. He suddenly pointed over. He was the one who summoned him. Wei Wuxian was at a standstill with Lan Wangji, but in an instant he became the focus of attention of everyone present. Jiancheng's lightning cold eyes slowly gazed in his direction. A moment later, Jiancheng's lips pulled into a twisted smile. His left hand subconsciously began stroking his ring once more. He said softly, Excellent. Back, are you? He let go of his left hand, and a long whip dangled from it. The whip was extremely thin. Just as the name Zidian implied, it was a long purple current of lightning, crackling like the dark thunder that crawled through stormy skies. He firmly gripped one end in his hand. When he brandished it, it was as if he'd struck out with an incomparably swift thunderbolt. Wei Wuxian hadn't yet made a move, but Lan Wangji had already taken out his guqin. Steadfast as he plucked the string, like a rock in a river rousing ripples, the sound undulated in the air. It clashed against the purple lightning, canceling the attack. All previous considerations Jiancheng had of not recklessly engaging in a fight and not making enemies of the Lan went out the window. That night, in the skies above Mount Dafan's forests, there were at times bursts of purple light. At other times it was as bright as day. There were at times the crashes of thunder, and at times the long wails of the guqin. The rest of the cultivators quickly retreated to a safe distance to watch from afar, scared witless but unable to move their eyes away. After all, it was rare to have the chance to see two distinguished cultivation leaders from prominent clans in combat, and they couldn't help but hope the fight turned even more aggressive, more intense. There was a certain current of unspeakable anticipation as they hoped the Lan and Jiangclangs really would fall out. Things would be interesting then. And over on the side, Wei Wuxian found his chance and bolted. Everyone was astonished. Hadn't the whip been missing him because Lan Wangji had been blocking it for him? Was he not seeking his own death by running now? Sure enough, it was as if Jiancheng had grown eyes on his back the moment he saw Wei Wuxian break out of Lan Wangji's area of protection. There was no way he'd miss such a good opportunity. He raised the whip and swung, and the purple lightning swam forth like a vicious dragon, striking him right in the heart of his back. Wei Wuxian was almost sent flying by the whip's impact, but fortunately the spotted donkey blocked him before he crashed directly into a tree. However, when the strike hit him, both Lan Wangji and Jiancheng stopped in their tracks, dumbfounded. Wei Wuxian rubbed at the small of his back and crawled to his feet with the support of the donkey, then hid behind it while he yelled, Wow! Must be nice coming from such a powerful clan, eh? Beating whoever you want. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Lan Wangji commented. Jiancheng also commented. It just says ... Shocked and outraged, Jiancheng commented further, What's going on? Zidian held a strange power. If it was used against an individual who was possessed, the body and the interloping soul would be separated, and said soul would be cast out of the flesh by purple lightning without exception. However, this man still behaved and moved as normal after being whipped, lively and well. There was no other explanation aside from the conclusion he was not possessed. Wei Wuxian, however, thought, duh, of course Zidian can't whip my soul out. I'm not possessed. I was offered a body. Forcibly offered a body. So what happened there? Zhang, recognizing the magic and Wen Ning and all, he thinks, oh, okay, my brother's possessing this guy. I'm gonna get him. Lan Wangji, for reasons that are not entirely immediately clear, defends him. I wonder why he does that. Does he possibly, surely he's just being noble and doesn't possibly recognize this person. And when Wei Ying runs out and he gets struck, they all expect the soul to fly out, but nothing happens because he wasn't possessing the body. He was offered it. It's different magic. That's what's going on there. Zhang appeared shocked and confused and was about to whip him again when Lan Jingyi protested. Sect Leader Jiang, isn't that enough? That's Zidian you're using. There was no such thing as an initial blunder that required a second attempt for a spiritual device on the level of Zidian. If a soul wasn't whipped out, then it was not whipped out. If the man wasn't possessed, he wasn't possessed. Otherwise, it wouldn't live up to his name. The shout forced Zhang, who cherished his reputation, to cease his assault. But if that wasn't Wei Wuxian, who else could summon Wen Ning? Zhang couldn't accept it, no matter how he thought about it, and he pointed at Wei Wuxian with a dark face. Who exactly are you? Just then, a noisy onlooker finally interrupted. He cleared his throat. Sect Leader Zhang, you might not be aware of this because you don't pay attention to such matters, but this Mo Xuanyu is the Jin clan of Lanling's... He's a former sect disciple of the Jin clan, but because his spiritual power was weak and he wasn't serious in his training, in addition to the harassment of his peers, he was kicked out of the Jin clan of Lanling. There was also talk he'd gone crazy? In my opinion, he was probably indignant at having failed in cultivating the orthodox path, and so he deviated. He might not be possessed by the Yiling Patriarch. That harassment? What harassment? Zhang commanded. That kind of harassment, Someone couldn't hold back and said, a cut sleeve! So yeah, he hit on a guy and he got kicked out, is what we think happened. Zhang's brows twitched. The look he gave Wei Wuxian was even more disgusted now. There was more to it, but no one dared say so in front of Zhang's face. While his reputation wasn't great, it had to be admitted that before the Yiling Patriarch Wei Wuxian had defected from the Zhang clan of young men, he'd been well known to be a handsome man and a sophisticated gentleman, well versed in the 6 arts. He had been ranked 4th in looks and the character among young masters of the prominent clans. Charming and cheerfully handsome, the people had called him, and this hot-tempered sect leader Zhang happened to be ranked 5th. Defeated by 1 rank, so no one dared raise the subject with him. Wei Ying was frivolous and a flirt, and he loved ambiguously gallivanting about with beautiful women. Who knew how many lady cultivators had fallen victim to his rotten charms? And yet there was never any word of him liking men. Even if he were to possess another in order to avenge himself, based on Wei Ying's taste, he would never pick a gay, donkey-riding lunatic with his face painted like a hanged ghost. I love it! Someone else grumbled. They're not alike, no matter how you look at them. And that flute was played so awfully. He can't even learn that right. He's a crude imitation. Upon the battlefield, back during the Sunshot campaign, the sound of Yiling Patriarch's flute had pierced through the lasting night, and his ghost soldiers and ghost generals had been like an invincible army of millions, cutting down all who stood in their way. That flute was said to be like divine music. So how could it be compared to the sad moan horribly played by the abandoned son of the Jin clan? Even if Wei Wuxian was an awful character, this wasn't how comparisons should be drawn. It was simply too insulting. Wei Wuxian felt a little woeful. Why don't you try not practicing for a dozen years and then make a crappy flute from some chopped sticks and play a tune? I'll kneel if you can play it well. Zhang had determined this man to be Wei Wuxian earlier, and the cold blood in his veins boiled. But now the Zidian in his hand was clearly telling him that no, it wasn't him. Zidian would never lie to him, nor would it ever make mistakes. He quickly calmed down to contemplate. This wasn't a big deal. He would find an excuse to take the man back with him and use every means possible to beat a confession out of him. Something would be spilled. There was no fear regarding that. He refused to believe the man would give nothing away. In any event, it wasn't like he hadn't done similar things before. Having come to this conclusion, he gave a hand signal. The disciples understood and approached in a circle. Wei Wuxian quickly led his donkey and hopped behind Lan Wangji's back, clutching his heart and gasping, "What are they gonna do to me?" Lan Wangji cast him a glance, tolerant of his incredibly rude, noisy, and exaggerated antics. Jiancheng saw he had no intention of moving aside and said, "Lan Gongzi, are you trying to make things difficult for me on purpose?" Everyone in the cultivation world knew this young clan leader of the Zhang family had developed a near-crazy obsession with taking precautions against Wei Wuxian, and that he would rather catch the wrong person than let anyone go. Anyone that was even remotely suspected of being possessed by Wei Wuxian would be taken back to the Zhang clan of Yanmeng to undergo brutal torture. If he elected to apprehend someone and bring them back, they would be certain to lose half their life. Lan Shizui spoke up. "Sect Leader Jiang, the truth is before us. Mokongzi is not possessed, so why must you trouble an insignificant individual?" Jiancheng said coldly, "Then I wonder why Lan Gongzi has been so determined to shield this insignificant individual since earlier." Wei Wuxian suddenly snorted and chuckled. "Hey, Sect Leader Jiang," he said. It's troublesome that you keep clinging to me like this." Jiancheng's brow twitched, instinctively sensing this person wasn't about to say anything pleasant. Wei Wuxian continued, "Your kindness is too much, thank you, but you're also overthinking things. Even if I like men, I don't like all men. And I definitely don't just go home with any man that waves at me. I'm not interested in your type." Wei Wuxian was trying to disgust him on purpose. Jiancheng hated losing. No matter how nonsensical the competition, if someone were to say he wasn't as good as so-and-so, he'd be so angry that he'd stop eating and drinking until he found a way to win against them. Sure enough, Jiancheng's face darkened. "Oh, then please enlighten me. What is your type?" "What's my type?" Wei Wuxian replied. I quite like Hong Guangjun's type." Lan Wangji, on the other hand, could never tolerate such frivolities and senseless jokes. Once he grew disgusted, he would definitely draw the line and keep his distance on his own. Disgusting both of them would be like killing two birds with one stone. Yet, unexpectedly, when Lan Wangji heard him, he turned around. "As you say," he said expressionlessly. Wei Wuxian said. Lan Wangji looked back. Without breaching etiquette, but allowing no room for discussion, he stated, "I am taking this person back to the Lan clan." Wei Wuxian was briefly speechless. "Huh?" Oh, I love it. And so, Wei Wuxian digs his own grave, trying to trick everyone into leaving him alone so he can run away. Making his brother jealous by saying, "Oh, you're not that good looking." Flirting with Lan Wangji to make him the serious, uptight guy, leave him. And suddenly, Mr. Serious and Uptight takes his bait and says, "Okay, you're coming with me. I wonder what's gonna happen when they go back to the Lan clan." And of course, Wei Wuxian is still in disguise. He still thinks he's under the radar and that nobody knows who he is. Jiancheng is suspicious, doesn't have any proof. Lan Wangji, we don't really know what he thinks, but clearly he's not acting the way that Wei Wuxian thinks he should act, knowing who he knew before. Something's up. God, I forgot how good this book is. It's been ages since I read it. This is my first time reading the new translation, so it's quite fun. We will be back on Friday. Probably 1 or 2 o'clock, I think. We'll see. I have other projects I'm working on, so I don't know what time will be good. Join the Discord if you want to keep up to date with updates and times and things. Let me, know in the comments what times are good for y'all. Help me plan future times for these. Tomorrow we'll be back with that weird horror game that I was playing. I don't think I have anything else to announce right now. I'm working on long-term stuff. I think that's it. Thanks again, and I will see you guys next time. Oh, and this is going on the second channel. If you don't know that, all my book live streams and things get moved to my book channel, The Gaming Muse with a Y. Should be a link in the description. If there's not, you can find it on my channel somewhere. So that'll be up later. Bye.